So how did Europe become engulfed in a second world war a mere 21 years after the first ended? In this lesson, we will cover some of the geopolitical realities that led to the launch of a new world war in 1939. Hitler's 1933 consolidation of power led to Germany growing into Europe's leading military power, despite earlier restrictions on the country's armaments as per the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler succeeded in crushing political opposition, building the German army and navy, controlling information through propaganda, while developing Germany's previously broken economy. With the growing power of Hitler's Nazi regime in Germany, European democracies like Britain and France grew increasingly nervous. The League of Nations had been unable to quell Mussolini's expansionist goals, giving Hitler and Stalin ammunition to pursue their own irredentist foreign policies. The growing aggressions of fascist and communist governments on the European continent, as well as growing international friction with Imperial Japan, would fan the flames of a global crisis. Although Spain would remain a neutral country in World War II, Spain fell under fascist rule in 1939. A conservative faction made up largely of landowners, devout Roman Catholics, and military leaders rebelled against the liberal government of Spain in 1936. The nationalists, the conservative faction, fought for control of the country against the Republicans, the leaders of the existing government. The Republicans were supported by many agricultural workers, urban workers, and members of the educated middle class. The primary nationalist leader was General Francisco Franco. Franco was a military man who favored a fascist style of government. With financial and military support from fascist allies, Hitler and Mussolini, Franco succeeded in defeating Republican factions. In April of 1937, German Air Force legions bombed the northwest town of Guernica, a stronghold of Republican support and an important market town for Spain's Basque ethnic minority. By March of 1939, the capital city of Madrid fell to nationalist forces. Spain remained under the control of Francisco Franco, whose military dictatorship lasted until his death in 1975. Back in Germany, Hitler made the move to annex neighboring Austria in 1938. This annexation, or political takeover, was known as the Anschluss. It was supported by some Austrians who wished to see the two German-speaking nations united under one government. Next, Hitler aimed to annex a region called the Sudetenland, a largely German-speaking province that had been made a part of Czechoslovakia in 1919. The Sudetenland was granted to Hitler by the terms of the Munich Agreement in September of 1938. The Munich Agreement was signed by Britain and France, who hoped that Hitler would be satisfied by adding the Sudetenland along with Austria to his realm of control. British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain declared the Munich Agreement would provide for peace in our time, but other European leaders feared Hitler would not stop with the Sudetenland. Winston Churchill, who would become Britain's Prime Minister in May of 1940, feared appeasing Hitler would empower the Nazi regime to push for further territorial acquisitions. Churchill's fears soon materialized when in March of 1939, Hitler ordered the Wehrmacht, Germany's land army, to take over the rest of Czechoslovakia. Across the world in Asia, the brutal expansionist policies of Imperial Japan were well underway. Japan was ruled ceremonially by Emperor Hirohito. Real political power was vested in the military, especially by General Hideki Tojo. Japan had occupied the Korean Peninsula since 1910 and the country's military government had its sights set on conquering more territory in neighboring China. Imperial Japan launched its invasion of the northern Chinese province of Manchuria in July of 1937. In China's then capital of Nanking, an estimated 300,000 Chinese civilians were killed. The Nanking Massacre provoked international outcry along with American, British, and French aid to Chinese defense forces. Domestically, China was caught between the rule of the Republican government led by the Kuomintang, or Chinese Nationalist Party, and communist insurgents who wished to take over the country. The Kuomintang was led by General Chiang Kai-shek, who was supported by Western democracies. The Chinese Communists, led by Mao Zedong, were supported by the Soviet Union. The two opposing Chinese factions briefly united to push back against the Japanese invasion. By 1938, diplomats from the Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan were pursuing an alliance. Further treaties were signed between the two countries in late 1939 and early 1940, after the new conflict had officially begun in Europe. Although Hitler was a sworn enemy of Soviet communism, a temporary alliance formed between Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia in August of 1939. The Nazi-Soviet Pact was also known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It was negotiated between Hitler's foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, and his Soviet counterpart, Vyacheslav Molotov. Although officially a non-aggression pact, it was also an agreement to partition or divide the nation of Poland. Germany took Western Poland, and the Soviets annexed Eastern Poland. The Soviets also seized the Baltic nations of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Poland, an independent nation established by the Treaty of Versailles, was allied with the Western democracies of France and Great Britain. September 1st, 1939, is the date World War II officially began in Europe. On this day, Hitler's Wehrmacht moved westward to invade Poland. The Luftwaffe, or German Air Force, bombarded Polish cities from the air. Britain and France had tried to appease Hitler by allowing him to take Austria and Czechoslovakia. However, the direct invasion of their ally, Poland, provoked a declaration of war. France and Great Britain declared war on Nazi Germany on September 3rd, 1939, after Hitler refused to withdraw his troops from Poland. Stalin took the initiative to launch an invasion of Finland in November of 1939. Finland was a small nation that had become an independent democracy following its succession from Russian Empire in 1917. The conflict between Soviet Russia and Finland is known as the Winter War and was fought as an early phase of World War II. Finland fought back with aid from their Swedish and Norwegian neighbors. The American government also authorized military aid to the besieged country. Temperatures along the Russian-Finnish border dropped to -40 degrees Celsius, causing heavy losses on both sides. Finland's fight for freedom frustrated Stalin as the Soviet army continued to be stalled by Finnish snipers and anti-tank tactics. One elusive Finnish sniper, a former farmer named Simo Häyhä, alone killed over 500 Soviet soldiers. Häyhä became known as the White Death due to his shooting abilities. Finland was forced to concede its province of Karelia to the Soviet Union. An armistice was negotiated in March of 1940 as Stalin realized he could not afford to keep fighting the Finns. The conflict that embroiled Europe between 1914 through 1918 was initially known as the Great War due to its scale of land and losses. Once a new World War broke out in 1939, the Great War would soon become known as World War I and the new conflict that would rage between 1939 and 1945 was known as World War II. The ruin of much of Europe after World War I and the rise of dictators like Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin created the breeding ground for another brutal war. World War II would have far-reaching impacts geographically as the Japanese alliance with Germany would create theaters of battle in both Europe and Asia. So let's review some key points of this lesson covering Europe on the brink of World War in 1939. All of the following were examples of expansionist efforts by dictatorial governments in the 1930s, except A. Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong alliance, B. Nanking massacre, C. Anschluss, D. Winter War, E. Sudetenland annexation. The answer is A. The Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong alliance.